After 30 years in silence, a desperate mother reveals her struggle. Then, an incredible $1 million scholarship fund shakes the foundations of Maplewood. Ruth had spent 30 decades in the confines of her little diner, flipping pancakes, pouring coffee, and forcing smiles while her heart ached beneath the weight of her unspoken burdens. Every day she wore the same faded apron, stained with the remnants of meals served to the good people of Maplewood, people who whispered behind her back. They didn't know her. They didn't know the ghost that had left her a widow at only 22. They didn't know that her husband, a soldier with boundless courage, had returned from combat, eyes haunted and spirit dimmed, only to be lost in a storm of silence and pain. As she stood at her usual spot, wiping down the counter, the aroma of fresh-baked goods wafted in. It was from Emma, the local baker, who always had a way of infusing warmth into her treats, an act of kindness that felt as rare as gold dust in Maplewood. This time, Emma handed Ruth a plate of cookies with a knowing smile, a small gesture that ignited embers of hope within her tired heart. Ruth glanced outside as the annual Harvest Festival approached. The town transformed into a tapestry of colors, pumpkins, cornstalks, and twinkling lights. But beneath the vibrancy, her heart was still cloaked in shadows. Memories rushed back like a tide. She recalled the nights spent hiding her tears, the shame of relying on food stamps, and the hand-me-down clothes she constantly reminded her children to be proud of. With years of struggle clawing at her soul, she remained shackled to silence. But what if she let it out? What if she stood before the townspeople and spoke her truth? Ruth felt her heart race as the thought gripped her tightly, an adrenaline shot coursing through her veins. With each passing day of the festival, the idea blossomed like the bright flowers adorning the square. The festival lights glimmered, urging her to take that leap, to unravel the fear she'd harbored so long. Before she acted, she thought of Emma's small kindness and how it had unlatched her heart's door. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. The festival unfolded, and with a resolve she had not felt in years, Ruth climbed onto the makeshift stage, the townspeople silently waiting. Under the glow of strings of lights, she shared her story, her shaking. It was more than her struggle. She spoke of the silence that had engulfed them all, of the fear to ask for help, and of the pressing need for understanding. As her words flowed, the crowd began to resonate with the pain, music to their ears. They sighed in recognition, tears glimmering in their eyes. But hope was short-lived. Just days after her moment of vulnerability, news erupted of a wealthy newcomer promising $1 million scholarship for Maplewood's children. The community cracked into factions, old prejudices stirring, questioning Ruth's worth in light of shiny promises. The more they gossiped, the more her resolve began to crack. As she faced the town's glaring judgments once more, Ruth learned the newcomer was not just a stranger, but a ghost from her husband's past, a long-lost friend who, unbeknownst to him, held the key to healing so many wounds. There, in that moment of uncertainty, Ruth found herself staring at a crossroads filled with potential and risk. As the festival continued around her, Ruth's truth hung in the balance, teetering between the silence she long endured and the hope she yearned to share. Would she finally step into the light and face the tides of judgment, or would fear sweep her back into the shadows? The heart of Maplewood pulsed with questions, and Ruth felt the weight of her next move more than ever, knowing it had the power to change everything or leave them all stuck in the dark. Ruth stood frozen on the edge of the stage, the colorful festival lights casting a glow over her upturned face. All the hope she had felt after expressing her pain flickered uncertainly, stifled under the weight of the townspeople's shifting loyalties. Word was spreading about the millionaire donating scholarships, and she became a ghost in her own town, overshadowed by glittering promises of a future she desperately wished for her children. Just then, her gaze met a familiar face. Luke, her husband's old friend, stood at the back of the crowd, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The warmth in his eyes stirred something within her, igniting memories she had fought so hard to keep buried. What would he think of her now? Would he understand the darkness she had carried for so long? Ruth's heart hammered in her chest as she continued watching him. Would he stand up for her? Would he lift her in a way no one else had? The questions flooded in, creating a whirlpool of emotion that nearly suffocated her. Then, without thinking, she stepped down from the stage, leaving behind her somewhat unreal moment under the lights. Ruth navigated through the crowd, her feet finding a familiar path. Each step ignited whispers and curious looks. Where was she going? Ruth, Emma's voice called from the sidelines, but her head was filled with thoughts of Luke. Inside the bakery, the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon embraced her like a warm hug. The comforting sights of flour-dusted counters and baked goods brought her some peace, but her resolve was elsewhere. Unprepared, she found herself standing before Luke. "Ruth," he said, surprised but soft, "I heard your words. They moved me." "Thank you," she whispered, feeling vulnerability wash over her, threatening to spill out in tears once more. "But I'm more worried about what's happening in town. People are getting caught up in the excitement of the scholarships and forgetting about us." His expression turned serious. "I understand. They don't know your story. They only see the potential of money, not the heart that built this community." "It's not just my story, Luke. It's theirs too. The silence, the needs we all hid behind." He stepped closer. "What do you want? How can I help you?" Ruth took a moment, every word heavy with years of unexpressed emotion. "It's not just that. It's the fear that if I stand up again, what I have, my children's future, everything could vanish in a blink. They are looking for hope, but will they see it in me?" Luke searched her eyes, his gaze unwavering. "You need to remind them why you are here. You have the strength, Ruth, more than you realize." As they stood there, a flicker of inspiration sparked within her. What if she took that stage again? What if she opened a dialogue that encouraged others to share their truths? Swept by a wave of courage, Ruth glanced at the flower-covered walls, envisioning the stories that had woven the fabric of Maplewood. "Maybe I can do it," she murmured, a renewed determination glimmering in her heart. "Maybe I can ignite a real conversation." "Then let's do it together," Luke pledged, anchoring her strength with his unwavering support. With her heart steadying, Ruth realized there was power in facing the shadows, and maybe a chance to see the light. But as the festival buzzed on outside, a thought nagged at the back of her mind. Would it be enough to pull the community together? Would people respond to the call of vulnerability? Or would fear, once again, keep them from embracing their truths? As the sun began to set over Maplewood, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, Ruth felt a profound sense of urgency. The moment was changing, but she could sense the tides shifting again. What would happen when she stepped back into the light? And would everyone decide to join her in sharing their stories? Her heart raced, aware that the next move could alter everything, yet also knowing she was no longer alone. Would Maplewood be ready for the truth? Ruth stepped back out into the evening air, the festival pulsing with life around her. The laughter and music felt distant, like an unfamiliar song. In her heart, she knew the weight of her decision was heavy. Luke's presence behind her was a reassuring anchor, but uncertainty lingered like shadows in the twilight. "Tonight is the night," she breathed out, her words nearly swallowed by the sounds of the festival. Luke, still at her side, nodded silently, an encouraging smile on his face. As the festival lights twinkled above, she felt an urge to grab the microphone again. This time to speak not just from a place of hurt, but from one of hope. She glanced around. People were gathered in clusters, their faces bright and animated. Yet, Ruth could sense a current of unease beneath their excitement. The scholarship news had made promises that felt both tempting and hollow. "Do you think they'll listen?" she asked, her voice wavering as she fought to keep the fear from seeping through. "They need to hear you," Luke replied firmly, his conviction not only liberating but infectious. Taking a deep breath, Ruth inched toward the stage. Her heart raced again, but it was different now. It wasn't just fear, it was a mingling of vulnerability and courage, a heady mixture she had seldom experienced. A few townsfolk noticed her approach, their chatter waning to murmurs. Emma, still worry etched on her face, caught her eye, urgency communicated in the tightness of her form. Ruth's insides twisted with panic. But even amidst that turmoil, a tiny flicker of determination ignited. Ruth remembered the stories of hardship, of resilience, the very tales that had been silenced too long. She thought of her own children, their dreams, their futures. They deserved to know that struggles could be voiced. "Excuse me," Ruth called out, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the noise. The crowd quieted, eyes drawn to her. A thrill of fear zipped through her, yet she pressed on. "Can I have just a moment of your time?" The sea of faces looked at her with curiosity, some with skepticism, others shifting in their places, unsure of what to expect. Would they recognize the struggle she spoke of? Would they feel the same urgency to grasp the truth she wanted to unveil? Ruth glanced back at Luke, who remained planted beside her, encouraging. With a deep breath, she began to unfold her story, sharing the shadows that had haunted her, the struggles that had crept through her days unnoticed, and the hope that flickered even in the darkest moments. As she poured her heart out, she could see a shift in the crowd. Murmurs of connectivity, whispers of acknowledgement began to ripple through the audience. Faces softened and eyes widened, perhaps seeing their own reflections in her words. Every confession she made became a thread weaving them together, a community bonded in their shared struggles of loss, fear, and the desperate longing for hope. Ruth felt her voice rise, carrying beyond her own fears. She was no longer just speaking for herself. This was for everyone who had stayed silent too long. The urgency within her grew stronger as she urged them to embrace their truths. Let us not forget the lives behind the smiles. Fear should never stop us from seeking connection. As she reached the end of her speech, a swell of emotion surged through her. There was a strength in vulnerability, a bond knitting them together, solidifying their shared experiences. For the first time in years, Ruth felt the rush of her own heart matched by the pulse of her community. But just as the crowd responded with nods and gasps of realization, a loud voice broke through, slicing through the moment of unity. The voice carried a tone that hinted at disruption, skepticism steeped in authority. "Who do you think you are, bringing this drama to our festival?" A sneer emerged from the back, a figure vying for control. Ruth's heart dropped at the sight. She'd expected resistance, but not in this way. Brazen and desperate. What would this voice do now? Would it drown out their budding connection? As she stood on that stage, vulnerable and exposed, she realized the battle wasn't just about speaking her truth. It was about holding space for everyone else, even against the rising tide of doubt. "Will we let fear speak louder than hope?" she called back, ready to push against the tide, ready to reclaim not just her voice, but the voices of Maplewood. The air thickened with tension, the festival's vibrant spirit hanging by a thread. Would her newfound bravery spark a collective voice, or would one voice of dissent unravel everything she had just built? The crowd waited, a collective breath held in anticipation, as Ruth felt the magnitude of her next words. What would she say to rally them against the encroaching shadows? Would they stand with her? Would Maplewood even have a chance at redemption? Ruth's heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline knitting fear and resolve together. The skeptical voice echoed painfully in her ears, yet she couldn't afford to back down now. She had ignited a spark, and she could feel the flicker of understanding behind the faces in the crowd. "Look at each other," she implored, her voice rising above the din. "We've all felt lost, scared, and uncertain. We've all worn our smiles while hiding the truth. The world keeps asking us to be brave, if not for ourselves, then for our families." She could see Emma's eyes glistening with unshed tears, the older woman nearby softly nodding. Ruth knew this was bigger than her. This was their collective rupture, a chance to stitch together a new narrative. "We need each other," she continued, her urgency echoing through the gathering. "Let's be brave together." The woman who had sneered took a step forward, anger pinching her features. "You think that just because you stand there spouting your heart, we're going to just fall in line? You want to preach about struggle and hope. What do you actually know?" Ruth felt the air pull tight around her, every breath constricted by the weight of doubt. But as she looked out across the crowd, something began to shift. People she had known for years, individuals who had shared the weight of their collective history, were beginning to stand taller, drawing strength from her words. Row by row, eyes began to meet hers, quiet defiance flickering in the gaze of the people they had once been, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, forgotten by a system that favored silence. Murmurs began to rise, voices in a low roar, echoing her call. "Let's not let each other down. Speak your truth, just like I'm speaking mine. We deserve better. Our children deserve better." The naysayer's expression shifted, disbelief etched in her features. But as Ruth spoke, the tide began to turn. "Think about what it means to be part of something greater than ourselves," she said. "To step forward isn't just about our own stories, it's about the stories of those we love." With each heartbeat, Ruth felt them rallying, like a slow ripple turning into a wave of compassion. She stood there, pushed by the bonds of history, the palpable pain and joy woven together into a tapestry of resilience. Then, from the back, a voice broke through the crowd. It was an elder man, his face weathered by time, but lighting up with recognition. "She's right," he called out. "We've seen too much and said too little. Our stories may be painful, but they are ours, and they need to be heard." The crowd swelled with support, as if the very ground beneath them vibrated with a shared heartbeat. Ruth felt her throat tighten with emotion. It was happening. The whispers of hope transformed into powerful declarations of faith in each other. But just as they turned from uncertainty into potential, the figure who had once sneered went quiet, replaced by a bleak expression. This was no longer a public dispute. Now it was a call to reclaim their community, a rallying cry against the weight of apathy. Ruth's thoughts raced. What next? Would she take control of this momentum, push for change beyond words? The tension in the air began to blend with excitement. This wasn't just a moment of vulnerability. This could mark the beginning of something tremendous. "What will we do from here?" she asked, voice trembling with passion. "What are we willing to fight for together?" As the crowd buzzed with possibilities, someone yelled out, "For our kids, for our future!" Would they truly unite? Could their collective voice bring about change? And if they stepped forward in unified strength, what new battles would they face? As the festival crowd shifted, Ruth felt hope blossom, but uncertainty still lingered. Little did she know, hidden forces were watching, and they would stop at nothing to silence her and the others who dare to speak. How would she protect this newfound courage? Would Maplewood stand as one, or would the very foundation of their hopes crumble before her? Ruth shifted her weight from foot to foot, her heart racing in sync with the crowd's newfound energy. The fear that had gripped her moments earlier felt lighter now, replaced by a fragile but stirring hope. But there was still a cloud of uncertainty hanging over them. With the cheers and voices echoing through the festival square, transform into meaningful action? Together, together, the crowd continued to chant, and Ruth felt the warmth of the community wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. She could see sparks igniting in the eyes of neighbors she'd known for years but had never truly seen. The elder man who had supported her, his hands raised in solidarity, was a beacon of encouragement. "What do we truly want?" she asked again, searching the faces around her. "What are we willing to fight for?" "Freedom!" someone shouted, a young mother holding her child to her chest. Hope danced in her eyes, and at that moment Ruth caught a glimpse of what was within reach. "A future! A voice!" came another reply, swelling with power. As calls of support flooded the air, Ruth took a deep breath. "Let's organize. Let's come together. We need to share our stories, our truths. Each of our experiences is valid, and we can take them to the local council. We can demand change." The crowd roared, but Ruth felt a tremor of doubt creep in. What if they had the courage to stand together and yet still face the same old obstacles? What if the powers at play continued to silence them? "Ruth!" a voice called, drawing her attention. It was Emma, her eyes gleaming with determination. "I've wanted to say this for years, but never had the courage. My son, he was bullied in school. No one cared to listen. If we don't speak out, no one will understand." The weight of Emma's words sunk deep into Ruth's heart. Here they were, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, each holding their pains, their shares of unspoken battles, eager to be free of the chains of silence that had bound them for too long. As more stories bubbled to the surface, Ruth knew they couldn't back down now. Not here, not after stirring the collective heart of the community. She felt a shift, a movement that stirred within her. It was powerful and relentless. "Let's schedule a community meeting," Ruth shouted, a fierce urgency in her voice. "We'll gather here every week until we form a plan. Together, we will advocate for our children, our families, our town. We will make them listen." The applause erupted like a wave crashing on the shore. But as she stepped back, still absorbing the first echoes of collective strength, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that not everyone was in support of this movement. From the corner of her eye, Ruth saw the woman who had sneered earlier. Though she stood silent, her glare cut through the crowd like a knife. It was a stark reminder that not all would embrace their fight for change. "Remember," Ruth raised her voice, folding her hands over her heart. "Fear can be powerful, but it can also be a catalyst for change." As she spoke, the look on the woman's face hardened, but something shifted within the crowd, and they began to rally even louder, a chorus blooming in strength. Could they truly face what lay ahead? How would they stand against the fears woven into the fabric of their small town? Ruth's heart swelled with hope, igniting a flame within her. The moment felt electric, the kind of energy only found in the face of change. As they chanted for justice, Ruth's mind raced with what could come next. But in the shadows, forces unseen began to stir, and they would leave no room for doubt, no space for rebellion. Would Ruth and her community be ready for the storm that was approaching? Ruth stood in the midst of the crowd, heart pounding, as their collective chant surged like a wave. The sound was magnificent, drowning out the whispers of doubt still lurking in her mind. But even as her spirit soared, the shadows around the edges seemed darker and more pronounced. People began filing away, energized by their shared purpose. Ruth watched as Emma embraced another mother, each of them strengthened by the weight of the words they had shared. This was it, their moment. They would no longer be just faces in the crowd. They were voices ready to echo through the halls of power. "Let's meet next week," Ruth called out, trying to hold on to the moment. We'll pick a time and a place. We need to keep this energy going. We need to make sure everyone is on board." As they began to disperse, a palpable buzz filled the air. Ideas floated and plans formed. But the lingering unease gnawed at Ruth. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Ruth!" A familiar voice drew her back, a familiar face emerging from the crowd. It was Larry, a well-respected member of the town council. His presence filled her with trepidation. She knew his views weren't always aligned with the community's desires. "Hello, Larry," she greeted cautiously, fingers clenching at her side. "Quite a gathering tonight, isn't it?" He tried for a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you all know what you're getting into." Ruth felt her stomach drop. "We're ready to fight for change," she stated firmly, her heart racing. "Things have to shift, and we won't back down." The shadow of doubt flickered across his expression before he returned to neutrality. "Just remember, change can come with a cost. Some want stability over disruption." A chill coursed through her. It felt like a warning, a reminder of the tides that could shift without warning. Just then, a loud noise pierced the air. A truck sped by, its tires screeching, a deliberate blare that pulled the community's attention momentarily away from their goals. Ruth's heart sank again as she spotted the sneering woman from earlier, standing next to the truck, laughing alongside others who clearly stood against the gathering. Her face twisted into a taunting smirk, and Ruth could sense the animosity boiling just beneath the surface. "Don't let them intimidate you," came Emma's voice, breaking Ruth's focus. Ruth turned, and the fire in Emma's eyes fueled her own. "Right, this is our time." Ruth raised her hand again, and for a brief moment the crowd rallied behind her once more. But she could feel the undercurrent of anxiety swell. The opposition was real, and it wasn't going away. The crowd dispersed quickly, some with smiles and chatter about the possibilities ahead, while others shared worried glances. Ruth lingered, watching as small knots of her neighbors spoke in hushed tones. She knew they had taken a step into the unknown. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Ruth replayed everything in her mind. The stories shared, the warmth of connection, and the threat lurking just outside their newfound resolve. What if, in their fight, they drew more scrutiny? What if their actions reverberated out into the world in ways they couldn't have foreseen? She turned onto her side, the weight of the night pressing down on her chest. And just as she felt fatigue creeping into her bones, her phone buzzed beside her. A text flashed. It was Emma wanting to chat about the next meeting. Ruth swallowed hard. Their dreams felt within reach, but would the reality of this fight threaten to unravel everything they hoped for? The uncertainty loomed larger than ever. What choices lay ahead, and would their community stand firm in the face of opposition? Would they truly be ready when the time came to face the storm head-on? The morning sun pierced through Ruth's bedroom curtains, casting a warm glow that nudged her awake. But as the light settled around her, she felt an ache in her chest that no amount of sunlight could soothe. Today was the day they would convene again. The meeting would provide clarity, or could unravel all the work they had just begun. She scrambled out of bed and began getting ready. The clothes she chose weren't just fabric. They were armor. Each button was fastened with determination. Each garment wrapped around her like a promise. Today, she would show her neighbors that strength was not just a word. It was an action. As Ruth joined the throng of familiar faces at the town community center, the air buzzed with anticipation. But as she looked into the eyes of those milling about, she felt an unspoken tension. The excitement intermingled with the apprehension of what lay ahead. "Hey, Ruth," Emma waved, her expression a mix of excitement and solemnity. "I've been thinking about our agenda. We need to make sure we're ready for anything." Ruth nodded, appreciating Emma's nonsense approach. "We have to address not just our goals, but the pushback we'll face. If Larry shows up again." Emma's eyes flashed with determination. We won't let fear dictate our actions. We stand together, remember? The room began to fill. The chairs, once neatly placed, transformed into a sea of shifting bodies and whispered hopes. The energy in the room built, each person bringing their own story. The single mother struggling to provide, the elderly man who had lost friends to neglect, the local librarian who felt her library was becoming a ghost town. Ruth's heart swelled with solidarity, but the weight of the room weighed against her chest. Then Larry entered, his presence overshadowing the air like a storm cloud. He scanned the crowd, and Ruth felt her heart race again. Why did it stir such deep anger in her? Was it because he represented the same establishment that had let them down for so long? "Good to see you all again," he announced, the confident tone in his voice masking any hint of sincerity. "I trust you're ready to discuss the implications of your last gathering." Ruth held her breath, willing herself to speak. But as the room fell silent, she was reminded of their fears, of the opposition. The memory of that smirking woman outside the meeting haunted her. How relentless could they be? Emma stepped forward, taking the initiative. "We're here to talk about real issues. This isn't just about us, it's about our community." Ruth felt a surge of pride as she watched Emma take charge, her voice ringing with clarity. Each word was like thunder. The room was her stage, building to an applause of realizations. Just as Emma was about to delve deeper into the plan's strategies, a voice broke through the hushed room. "And what of those disruptions everyone fears?" It was Larry, his tone sharp, a thin smile cutting at the edges of his lips. "What if your fight brings more trouble than the change you seek?" Ruth felt the collective hold of breath in the room. An electrifying moment of uncertainty engulfed them. She had to respond. "What if our fight brings hope?" Ruth stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What if it brings change? Isn't that worth the risk?" As the murmur swirled, resonating through the crowd, the fear in her heart began to morph into something beautiful: resolve. Maybe, just maybe, they were ready to face anything that tried to hold them back. But as watchful eyes scanned the room, Ruth felt another chill creeping up her spine. She needed to know if they truly stood united. Can we truly face what's to come? She wondered silently, her gaze sweeping across her neighbors' faces. The answers loomed like shadows in the flickering light. Would they join her or would they falter? But amidst the uncertainty, a bold question surged within her. Were they brave enough to take a leap of faith? What awaited them beyond today? Would they take the plunge together when the stakes were at their highest? Ruth took a breath, grounding herself as she stepped farther into the center of the room. The warmth from the sunlight felt distant compared to the cold tension swirling around them. Encouragement flickered in her heart, but doubt still whispered in her mind. "Look around," she said, her voice steady. "We're not just a group of neighbors anymore. We are a community. Everyone here has faced their own battles, and today we honor those battles by fighting for the change we all deserve." A soft clap started in the corner, and soon Emma joined in, followed by others. The sound grew, brightening the heaviness, lifting some of the weight off Ruth's shoulders. She could see the flicker of hope in eyes that once were clouded with uncertainty. But then Larry chimed in, slicing through the moment like a knife. "Hope is all well and good, Ruth, but your determination will only get you so far. Have you even considered the consequences of your actions?" Ruth's heart raced again, almost drowned out by the rising murmur among the crowd. Words clinged to the back of her throat. She had to push back. In this moment, she couldn't let them break. "What we do now is about our future, not just ours, but for the children we raise and the memories we want to create. I refuse to let fear of what might happen silence our voices." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. Faces nodded, bodies stiffened with resolve. But lurking deep within were those fragile threads of fear, whispering doubts that hung on the edges of their resolve. Ruth's right, Emma thought, to build momentum. If we let those fears build walls around us, we'll never progress. We owe it to our families, all of them. That was it. Ruth felt the collective voices tightening around her, palpable, loud, enough to drown out Larry's sneers. One by one, stories began to surface, shared from the heart. Ruth listened intently as the single mother spoke about the difficulties of juggling 2 jobs and children. They all felt the strain of a community that felt overlooked, but their shared experiences wove them tighter, stronger. Then, a voice trembling with emotion caught everyone's attention. "I lived here for 30 years and never spoke up," an elderly woman confessed, tears glistening in her eyes. "I buried my pain, my fears, until I couldn't anymore." She paused, glancing around at the encircling faces. "Today, I'm here to stand with all of you. I can't stay silent any longer." Even Ruth felt the tears prick at her own eyes. The woman's words struck a chord, a melody of pain and resolve that echoed in the hearts of many. The entire room fell silent, the gravity of the moment sinking in. It wasn't just about overcoming fear. It was about unearthing the truths they had hidden within for too long. "Together, we can make an impact," Ruth spoke softly, yet her words carried weight. They had shared their struggles, and in that shared vulnerability lay power. But just as hope began to settle like a warm blanket over them, Larry's voice rose again. "You think this will end well? This will only create a bigger divide. Have you thought of that?" Ruth felt anguish bubble up inside her. What if he was right? What if their fight only brought pain? But another voice chimed in, steady and convincing. And what if it doesn't? The room shifted with this new perspective, the atmosphere crackling with hesitant resolve. The uncertainty hung in the air like a storm cloud about to break. Ruth dared to meet Larry's eyes. What if we dared to hope and act on it despite the risks? A chorus of murmurs ensued, each voice steadying her resolve. They were facing it, raw and real. But as they rallied around this new sense of unity, another thought crept into Ruth's mind. What if the hardest part was still ahead? Would they still be standing together when the truly tough decisions had to be made? As she looked into her neighbor's eyes, she felt both fear and exhilaration. They were teetering on the edge, and soon they would find out if they could truly leap together. Would courage bond them or fracture their resolve? The journey was just beginning. Would they choose to rise or fall apart? A hush fell over the room, a palpable pause filled with the weight of possibilities. Ruth caught her breath, feeling an electric charge of emotion swirl around them. Larry's skepticism hung heavy in the air, but the voices of the others filled her with courage. Suddenly, a young man stepped forward, his brow furrowed in determination. "I lost my job last year," he admitted, his voice wavering but gaining strength. "I didn't know how I was going to provide for my kids, but I decided to fight, not just for myself, but for them. We need change, and it starts here." Those words sparked a ripple through the gathering. Others began to share their stories, their fears, and their hopes, each more compelling than the last. A new rhythm formed in the room, a rhythm of connection and empowerment. Ruth locked eyes with Emma and saw the fire reflected back. "We've been waiting too long," Emma yelled with unexpected fervor. "Today we take our voices back. We need to act. Let's make a plan, not just talk." The enthusiasm spread like wildfire. Hands shot up, eager to contribute ideas. Ruth felt her heart pound in her chest, excitement propelling her forward. "What if we start by organizing a community meeting?" she suggested. "A chance for everyone to speak, to be heard, to share their stories. Let's put together a list of issues that matter." "Yes," echoed voices around her. And we can reach out to local leaders at organizations for support. We can create a petition. Ideas flew back and forth, filling the once muted space with a sense of purpose. Ruth's heart raced, not just from the thrill of their determination, but from the overwhelming realization that they were embarking on something much bigger than individual challenge. But just as she felt the tide turning, Larry pushed back one more time. "You think they'll listen to us? They have their agenda. We're just—" A lot of voices drowning in the noise. Ruth felt anger flicker at his dismissal. Yet it was quickly triumphed by the chorus of replies from her neighbors. "We may be just voices, but together we can be a movement," someone called out. Ruth's head spun. They were taking the courage she'd kindled and turning it into fire. The stories shared, the compassion pieced together, created a solid foundation. As the adrenaline surged through her, Ruth noticed an elderly man at the back, arms crossed, deep in thought. She had seen him for years but never really known him. "What do you think?" she asked, inviting his silence to break. He hesitated, eyes darting to Larry and back to Ruth, weighing something heavy on his heart. "I've been through more than I'd like to remember, but standing up often felt less painful than it is today. What if we lose?" The question hung like a lead balloon. Ruth felt her breath catch. What if they did fail? What if nothing changed? But then the flicker of hope reminded her of that young woman earlier, of the mother who had found her voice. "Maybe we will," she replied slowly but firmly. "But we'll lose a lot more if we don't try. Silence is defeat." The man's face softened, the weight of his skepticism slowly lifting. "You're right. We have to try." A wave of agreement washed over the room, heartbeats quickening under the shared understanding. They were no longer uncertain neighbors. They were a hopeful community. Ruth felt herself smile as laughter started breaking out, nervous but electric. But then a firm knock sounded on the door, interrupting the gathering. Everyone turned to face it, confusion and apprehension washing over them like cold water. It felt as if the air shifted, an unknown presence looming just outside. What waited on the other side? Did it hold danger or opportunity? Ruth's heart raced again. Was this the moment they had all been waiting for, or something much more daunting? As the door creaked open, all eyes were glued to the threshold, each breath held tight in collective anticipation. Would they find the courage they had just begun to nurture, or would the new presence pull them back into silence? The door swung wide, and in stepped Luke, his familiar figure cutting through the tension like a ray of sunlight. Relief flooded the room, banishing the shadows that lingered. He walked towards Ruth, his expression a blend of determination and concern, as if he carried news heavy with expectation. "Ruth," he began, his voice steady, "I've been listening outside. I wanted to hear what everyone had to say. And it's beautiful, what's happening here." The crowd, still recovering from the sudden interruption, leaned in, eager for Luke's words. Ruth felt a surge of hope at his presence. Luke had been a steady flame in the storm, someone who understood the depth of struggle and the sweetness of resilience. "We're starting to build something, Luke, but you all need to know that I want to help. I've seen what silence can do, my friends' battles, their stories. It's time we brought them into the light." Ruth looked around the room, watching as the townspeople exchanged glances. For once, they shared an understanding, an unspoken agreement rising like a swell. Each of them had felt the heavy shadows of isolation, and now Luke's stirring invitation offered a chance to finally connect. "Together, we can reach out to more of the community," Ruth interjected, emboldened by Luke's support. "Let's show them that we are not just faces in the crowd. We are voices ready to make a change." The crowd erupted with applause, a rhythm of encouragement pulsing through the space. It felt instinctively right, a celebration of their vulnerability transforming into an undeniable strength. Hope and resolve mingled in the air, thickening like the sweetness of Emma's baked goods. "We should set a date for the community meeting," Luke suggested. "With urgency, we want the whole town to show up." And just like that, the gathering became a whirlwind of ideas and plans. Ruth's heart soared as many contributed their thoughts, crafting flyers, setting up social media pages, and reaching out to community leaders. But a sharp realization soon struck her. Even with the excitement surging, they would face those who would resist, who would fear any shift in their familiar comforts. Especially Larry. Ruth took a moment, stealing glances at the gathered faces. With newfound courage, she found herself leaning into that reality. "This isn't just about planning a meeting," she spoke, her voice firm yet tender. "It's about creating a space for all our voices to be free, to rise and meet the challenge ahead." Before she could further elaborate, someone at the back spoke up. "What if we invite Larry to our meeting? Maybe he needs to hear our perspectives too." Ruth hesitated. Could it work? Would bringing the opposition into the fold help them understand? But before she could respond, a groundswell of agreement rippled through the crowd. The energy was infectious. She could feel the connection tightening around them, a living heartbeat of the community forming under her touch. "Let's do it," Ruth finally said, her voice steady. "Let's invite everyone. It's time to show up and speak our truth together." The murmurs of anticipation filled the community center, a spark igniting in their eyes. Ruth watched as hands raised in solidarity, and with each gesture, fear loosened its grip. Today was no longer just about her. It was a shared battle. After the meeting concluded, Ruth sank into a chair, exhausted yet exhilarated. Emma plopped beside her, breathing hard but shining bright with enthusiasm. "You did it," Emma said, her smile infectious. "I don't know, Emma. Can we really pull this off?" "Absolutely," insisted. "Look at what we've started. We've brought everyone together. It's more than we've had in years, and it's only the beginning." As she spoke, Ruth felt the fire in her heart flicker alive again. The journey would not be easy, and undoubtedly they would contend with the forces of doubt and disbelief. But now they were no longer alone. Later that evening, as she lay in bed, Ruth felt a wave of peace wash over her. Outside, the stars shone brightly, a tapestry against the indigo sky. That night, she trusted in the collective heartbeat of Maplewood, the stories waiting to be told. In this fragile, beautiful place, something was blooming, a movement rooted in hope, in truth, and in love. And as dawn broke over Maplewood the next morning, Ruth awoke with renewed purpose. She looked forward to the meeting, ready to open a dialogue, allowing each voice to rise. They would not shroud in silence any longer. They would stand together, daring to face whatever came next. Together they would shine, even in the shadows. So let's do this together. You need to subscribe now to keep up with more exclusive stories like this one. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to help the algorithm spread the word. Comment below about your feelings and reactions to this ending. Don't wait, not even one more second, to share this life-transforming story with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. Your engagement matters.